Well, hello everyone. I want to welcome you to Horizons 2021 and thank you so much for joining us today. Um, our panel on ramps and up ramps for women, post-pandemic strategies for reemployment and advancement. I'm here with a stellar panel of experts in the field of women's employment for advancement and opportunity. And I'd like to introduce them to you. I'm going to just give you their names and titles, and please check out the Horizon site for their full bios and all the deep work in this area that our panelists have been doing over the last decades. So first, I'd like to introduce Chandra Childers. She's the study director at the Institute for Women's Policy Research. Lark Jackson, Gender Equity Center Program Director, National Center for Women's Equity in Apprenticeship and Employment in Chicago Women in Trades. And Lauren Pascarella-Daly, Senior Director, Women and Future of Work Initiative at Catalyst. So thank you all panelists for joining us today.
Thank you.
Welcome. I want to start my first question with Chandra. So we've seen that the economy is starting to recover, but we've all been hearing that employers are having a hard time finding workers to fill job openings. And to some, we're hearing that there isn't a job shortage, but a worker shortage. There's even talk about reducing additional unemployment benefits to move more people into the workforce. So I wanted to ask you how you would respond to these kind of insights and comments.
Sure. Thank you very much. And thank you for having me. So I think that when the focus is on employers having difficulty finding workers, especially in the current recovery from the current pandemic, the response to that is a little bit complicated. But I will say at the start that I think that it's to blame overly generous either unemployment or stimulus misses many of the factors that actually do prevent workers generally, and women workers in particular, from returning to the labor market. One of the things is low wages in many of these jobs and occupations. A common understanding of labor shortage is identified when employers raise their wages to attract the workers that they want, but still are unable to fill those positions. While we have seen a little of this happening, for example, in leisure and hospitality, this is not something that's happening across the labor market writ large. And we don't expect that to happen across the labor market writ large. So therefore, to cut off benefits when only one sector is actually beginning to raise wages doesn't seem to make sense. But also what we do know is that these jobs, even with the rise in wages, will remain low-wage jobs that will provide workers with too few benefits going forward. But that's not the only factor that we have to think about. We also have to think about some of the barriers, some of the things that are keeping workers, again, primarily women, out of the labor market. So our insufficient care structure. Our infrastructure for care was already insufficient before the pandemic began. And now, the pandemic closed childcare centers, schools, children were having to be schooled from home, and we still have a significant number of schools that have not returned to full time for all students. So these are barriers that women are facing in moving back into the labor market. And evidence that looks at this suggests that cutting back on unemployment or, not providing other resources for these families is not going to help move them into the labor market. What they need is that to build on that care infrastructure so that they have the care that they need. One other issue that I would like to highlight is looking at the research that points out that it is not unemployment payments or stimulus that's the problem. So, for example, there's research last year when the unemployment insurance gave workers an extra $600 in addition to their unemployment benefits. And research looking at that found that we didn't see where those payments made up a larger share of workers' earnings. We didn't see they weren't more likely to stay out of the labor force. So that research does not support that either unemployment insurance benefits or that stimulus payments are impacting workers from returning to the labor market. In many low wage sectors of the economy, which is where we would expect to see the slowest growth if that were happening, we're not. We're seeing, for example, leisure and hospitality has some of the fastest growth that there is across all sectors. And those are also many low wage jobs. So I would say that that's misguided and it overlooks many of the factors that are actually preventing women from moving back into the labor force.
Yeah, you make some good points about all the additional barriers to employment, especially women are facing. So, Lauren, what I wanted to ask you from your vantage point is that we've seen that organizations have undergone massive transformation in the last year. Have you seen in this process opportunities opening up that are going to help build on-ramps and up-ramps for women that might address some of the barriers that Chandra was speaking about?
Yes, at Catalyst, we really believe that although it's been a challenging year and we know that women and especially women of color have been disproportionately impacted through the pandemic, through job losses and the health disparities that have occurred, we really feel optimistic that we are at a point where we can redesign the workplace for more equity moving forward. We know that employees' expectations about work has shifted. We expect different things now, having gone through the pandemic, from our workplaces and our employers. And employers who are forward thinking will understand that in the face of talent losses and talent shortages, moving to a more equitable, diverse, and inclusive workplace can be really helpful in attracting and retaining talent and solving some of those needs. We also see that, the advent in flexible and remote work is a great opportunity moving forward. We realize that not every industry and role seems like it lends itself very easily to flexible and remote work, but we are hopeful that organizations really see the benefits of that. At Catalyst, we have some research that shows access to flexible and remote work can reduce burnout, it can increase innovation, commitment to your organization, and your experiences of inclusion. And so trying to expand this to be more equitable so more people in more industries and more roles have access to flexible and remote work is really key. And even industries like manufacturing are playing around with emerging technologies to see how they can allow their workers to have more access to flexible and remote work. We really see that this can solve some of the childcare and caregiving crisis that is occurring in this country. We know that the pandemic really exposed just how tenuous that structure is. And thinking about moving forward, looking at the impact of caregiving and having access to flexible and remote work, our recent research that we just released shows that women with childcare responsibilities who had access to remote work were 32% less likely to intend to leave their job in the next year than women with childcare responsibilities who did not have access. So again, it's about trying to expand, think about how we can get people into new roles, and really try to build a more equitable future of work moving forward.
Um, so, Lark, from your vantage point, what have you been seeing as changing as a result of the pandemic when it comes to women's access to the high-paying advanced trade occupations? Um, do you see similar barriers and opportunities that Chandra and Lauren have suggested, or are there additional specific ones for these sectors of the economy?
Yes, thanks for that question, Lois. And thank you, Chandra and Lauren, for your insight. I would echo a lot of their sentiments, all of them actually. So, in terms of access, I think we're in a very special time where a lot of women are rethinking their careers, right? If they have lost their jobs or if, the pandemic has forced them into a situation where they need to make a transition, a lot of women are now being introduced to the high skilled, high earning skilled trades such as construction, manufacturing, transit, and rail. And so I think it's a unique opportunity for, um, registered apprenticeship programs, and for employers, community-based organizations to really collaborate and figure out how to capitalize on this new interest in the skilled trades. So just kind of echoing some of those barriers and outlining a few more, I think that most of the barriers to women's access to and retention in the skilled trades during the pandemic were the same as they were pre-COVID. So these barriers, I would say, were just amplified. And, I think that we all saw in stark contrast how the pandemic affected women versus how it affected men. So I just kind of want to divide up the barriers a bit. So for our work, what we see is that barriers to women entering the skilled trades have been disparate impact of selection criteria, lack of career education and outreach from apprenticeship programs, inadequate on-the-job training, so OTJ. I'm sorry, yeah, OJT, sorry, during their employment. So, right, so a woman who's, spending a lot of time maybe sweeping instead of getting the foundational skills that she needs to be successful in her career pathway. Gender discrimination, discrimination of all kinds, whether it be religion, sexual orientation, stereotypes about women's work, right? And so lack of information about entry routes and some of those barriers to women's retention in our work that we've seen historically that have still persisted through the pandemic have been childcare challenges, unreliable transportation, so women living in transportation deserts, housing instability, domestic violence, discrimination, and just isolation from being the only woman on a job site. So I would say the pandemic put these on full display in our work, in our communications with our tradeswomen, so that we could, I say as an industry, we could no longer ignore them. And I think that the opportunities that exist for women in our field specifically, but I think it's also transferable to all women, is that we can dismantle some systems. We can rethink sanitary, bathroom facilities, right? Because we've seen what happens when we don't have them in a pandemic. We can rethink childcare and investing in infrastructure, which I should note that that's a process that women cannot be left out of as we're thinking about infrastructure. I think it also takes all of us collaborating again. So registered apprenticeship programs, employers, other training programs, community-based organizations, workforce boards, and all working together just to, ensuring that we have the funding, that we have the support that we need from entities such as the U.S. Department of Education, Department of Labor. I want to bring up, for instance, we need to ensure that we have funding in American apprenticeship. Okay, it's a pipeline to these career pathways, so that women don't only just have life sustaining wages, but life advancing wages. So I think this is just a unique opportunity for us to really think about these systems and to dismantle them or just rebuild them.
Well, as you mentioned, Lark, we know that this pandemic, unusual in many ways, but one is the devastating impact on women's employment and labor participation, which is by some accounts at a 30-year low. And we do see in the U.S. jobs bill a focus on many of these high-weighing, high-paid jobs are the vast majority of male dominated. So building those on-ramps that you speak about in recruitment, in addressing gender and other kinds of discrimination, in providing training, is what we are going to need to build the economy back, and for employers to have the supply of labor that's needed. These systems are going to have to be built and changed. And I want to turn to Chandra here to speak about, well, what we know for Black women and Latina women is that there's been a disproportionate effect on unemployment. Black and Latina women are disproportionately employed in low-wage jobs that provide few benefits, and we know that the pandemic has exacerbated these gaps. Black and Hispanic women's unemployment rates have been much higher than white women's at the height of the pandemic. So given these inequalities, what do we need to do to ensure that the recovery is equitable and that Black and Latina women are not just returned to the pre-pandemic status, but provided with real opportunities for economic and job mobility?
Yes. So, and thank you for that. And I'm going to draw on some of the stuff that's already been said, but I think that really the focus has to be not just getting people into the labor market, but getting them into jobs that allow them to provide for themselves, provide for their families, lift themselves out of poverty. And we know that, again, Black women, Latina women, they have always, again, before the pandemic hit, as Lark said earlier, the pandemic really just highlighted and it put a spotlight on the issues that Black and Latino women were facing. But in going forward, especially if we're to make sure that our investments in this recovery actually benefit everyone and it lifts everyone up, there are a few things that we can do that could at least get this process moving. Probably the most important, I think, or I won't say the most important, I think one important one, though, is to address the quality of the jobs that exist. Black and Latina women are overrepresented in low-wage jobs. They're overrepresented in jobs that do not provide workers with benefits, health insurance, pension plans that do not allow them to live a life, to fully live a good life. And so we need to work on that by beginning to raise the minimum wage. That is something that will lift up all workers and will disproportionately benefit Black and Latino workers. Providing access to paid leave policies, providing access to health care coverage. We're coming out of a pandemic and too many people still don't have access to health insurance. Another way that would really benefit Black and Latino women is to increase their access to collective bargaining. This is something in itself that is a great way to lift their wages. We know that women in unions have higher earnings than women who are not represented by a collective bargaining contract. So that's one way to go ahead and start moving those wages up and increasing access to benefits. And then I think, and this goes to what Lark was talking about, we need to begin to address that gender wage gap and begin to address occupational segregation. That is another powerful way to begin to lift up Black and Latino women, because we know that a large part of the gender wage gap is a racial wage gap. So while all women are paid 82 cents for every dollar that men are paid, we know that Black women are paid just 63 cents for every dollar paid to white men, and Latinas are paid just 55 cents. So beginning to address these issues, raising the minimum wage, collective bargaining, those are ways to start to address that. But it will also be important to, move women into those trades jobs, as Lark was talking about. We did a study looking in New Orleans at the impact of the pandemic and a way forward. And 40% of job losses were in leisure and hospitality, where women are overrepresented. These are also low-wage jobs, disproportionately, that do not provide workers with benefits. When those jobs come back, there's still going to be low-wage jobs that do not provide workers with benefits. Yet there are jobs in the construction trades, manufacturing, transportation. They were not hit nearly as hard. They pay much better wages. They pay family sustaining wages without requiring a college degree. And that will help to begin to reduce occupational segregation and begin to close that gender wage gap. So I think those are some of the ways that we could really begin to make a difference and improve the quality of all jobs for all workers, and to especially lift up Black and Latina women and lift up their families and pull their children out of poverty.
Yes, so providing these on-ramps into good-paying jobs specifically for Black and Latino women is a crucial anti-poverty measure, um, and necessary to lift these families out of poverty, as you're saying. And also it is a good economic growth strategy for the country. So it will allow the employers to find the talent they need. And I know, Lark, that the Chicago Women in Trades, this is really right at the core of your mission. And I was wondering if you could talk about some of the promising practices that you've embraced at Chicago Women in Trades to build on-ramps for Black and Latino women into these high-wage jobs.
Thanks, Lois. So first, I should start by highlighting our briefing paper that we collaborated with the Institute for Women's Policy Research on, specifically Chandra. And the briefing paper was conducted with Black, Latina, and Afro-Latina tradeswomen in registered um, uh, apprenticeships in construction. And it really just highlighted their experiences being tradeswomen. And, we really heard from them directly um, how they got into the trades, their entry points, and then also their their desires for the industry to, become more inclusive. And so I would say not only from that work, but also from our experience working with tradeswomen and working with industry stakeholders, providing technical assistance on this work on how to engage more women of color. For on-ramps, I think it's always first to just consider those barriers. Um, Again, childcare, access to transportation, lack of outreach and career education about these skilled, high-earning, non-traditional careers. Um, I think we need to think about how we are assessing women of color for these opportunities so that our own implicit biases don't creep in. I kind of want to jump back to what Chandra was saying earlier. I agree. I don't think that there's a lack of workers. I think there's a lack of equitable opportunity, really. And so I think we need to, as an industry, right, thinking about, again, all those collaborative forces I already highlighted, workforce boards, registered apprenticeship programs, employers, training programs. We need to think internally about how we can be more creative in our outreach, where are our blind spots, and how in the language that we're using to attract women of color, for instance. We need to make sure that women of color see themselves in these opportunities. I always advise training programs that if you are interested in recruiting more women of color need to be on your recruitment flyers. Um, and then just a few other recommendations that we've specifically outlined for registered apprenticeship programs, but it's transferable to employers. It's transferable to other training programs. Is that, setting goals and documenting those goals, adding numerical values to your recruitment and your retention goals for women, ensuring that workspaces are inclusive and equitable by posting clear policies right in the workplace that speak to that. Again, on the job training hours need to be fair, and they need to be the type of hours that where women are really getting the skill sets that they need to be competitive in the job market. Um, we even recommended that registered apprenticeship programs and identify an ombudsperson who can serve as an intermediary and just help navigate any challenges women of color may experience, or just providing the support and assistance to women of color. Um, Building linkages between pre-apprenticeship programs and community-based training organizations. So employers look to those organizations to recruit from. Again, it's not a shortage of workers. And these pre-apprenticeship programs, I just want to shout out a few. In addition to CWIT, you have New in Seattle, Washington, Tradeswomen Inc. in California, New in New York City, Oregon Tradeswomen, Women in Construction in Biloxi, Mississippi, West Virginia Women Work. So and NCTE in Massachusetts. So you have all these pre-apprenticeship programs that are creating these solid pipelines to have qualified, high-skilled women entering these non-traditional high-skilled career pathways. So again, it's about collaborating and looking for the entities that can help you identify those qualified candidates. I also, again, want to highlight, if we're talking about on-ramping, we always need to focus on ensuring compliance with EEO and affirmative action. And I also want to highlight that I think the more that employers and training programs think about diversity and inclusion as an asset and not a liability, I think the better off it will be.
Well, thanks so much for that, Lark. It's great to hear about all these emerging programs, well, I encourage you to check out the brief as well. Now, I know Catalyst, Lauren, we work very intimately with employers around these issues. So I wonder if you could help add some insights here on how these employers will build some of these DEI efforts.
Sure. And I think what's really important with what Chandra and Lark have highlighted is that employers need to have an intersectional lens when they're thinking about building an equitable future of work. We know that based on where people are positioned and their different identities, that will impact the access to opportunities and the barriers they have in the workplace. So it's really key that employers are thinking about this, not just for one group, but thinking about how all of our all of our identities intersect and impact our ability to belong, contribute, and thrive in an organization. One of the things that we've been looking at Catalyst is the impact of automation. And with the impact of the pandemic also impacting industries that are frontline industries, we really see that many organizations are now accelerating their automation strategies, particularly in these frontline industries with traditionally higher representation of women and women of color in particular. And so thinking about how we can create jobs and reskilling and upskilling programs for people who are being disproportionately impacted by the pandemic and automation strategies is really key in moving forward. And one thing that we're looking at very closely at Catalyst is how we can create equitable access to reskilling programs. Because we know that, with gender stereotypes and biases, a lot of times people may have ideas about who should go into a career, what careers are for different genders, and also thinking about who's getting access to those. So we know that the culture can often become a barrier for people if the market looks like it's not something that is attractive to different groups of people. So making sure that we're really creating equitable access and making jobs more equitable through creating cultures where everyone can belong, contribute, and thrive. That's really key. The other aspect of it from an employer's perspective is knowing that, it's one thing to get people through pipelines and an on-ramp to new jobs, new career paths that are going to solve talent shortages and build new diverse talent pipelines. But it's also very important that we are able to when we have people enter fields, that we can keep them there. So this is where I think going back to creating cultures that are valuing diversity, equity, and inclusion, and not just looking at getting people in, but how we can keep them and how we can advance through the ranks has a great societal benefit, but also to the organizations.
Thanks very much, Lauren. So in our final questions here, I want to go back to you, Chandra, to ask, we've heard a lot about the barriers certainly facing women, and particularly women of color, women with caring responsibilities. We've heard about strategies that work and that can be taken by employers and by policymakers. So what I want to know from you is looking at that policy lens, what do you think we need to see implemented to support women's re-entry and advancement into the workforce, to really encourage employers, educators, policymakers to put the systems in place to build these on-ramps? please come off mute, Chandra. That's okay.
I almost made it through without talking on mute once. So I think that there's a few things that I think overall, just first of all, making jobs better jobs. I think having better quality jobs overall, and that includes jobs that pay a living wage, jobs that provide workers with benefits that allow them to be able to provide for their family and prepare for the future. I think that's going to be crucial. So that includes things like raising the minimum wage. As I talked about, it includes increasing access to collective bargaining. I think to support women as they move into the workforce and women who are already in the workforce, we've got to definitely build our care infrastructure. And it's not just child care. You know, women have responsibilities, not just for children and grandchildren, but also caring for elderly parents or for family members with physical disabilities. So being able to build that care infrastructure as well as giving women flexibility to be able to meet those needs as paid leave policies. As Lauren mentioned, some flexibility to work remotely when possible. And then I would say two other things that I think are really important is to address the cost of education and training, and that includes through apprenticeships. You know, again, with the focus on Black women, we know that Black women graduate, they're getting the education that they're told to get that's so important for their economic advancement, but they're also graduating with all of this student loan debt that is burdening them down. They've also got demands to help care for family members, and the returns that they get on that education, it's not the same as their white counterparts. So they're being disadvantaged in every way. So finding ways to address those costs, and again, registered apprenticeships are a great way to do that. And then I think also a really important piece of this is access to health care. In this country, we provide it through work. We provide it through the jobs that people have. But until we are, ready to ensure that all jobs have that access, those states that have not expanded Medicaid need to do so as well. So I think those are some of the policies that I would put forward as even a beginning to ensure that we've got an equitable recovery and that all women have an opportunity to contribute in the labor market as well as benefit from good quality jobs.
And Lauren, from your work with employers at Catalyst, the employers that are really leading these diversity, equity, inclusion efforts, that are putting in resources and systems and structures, what do you hear from them about why they're doing this?
I think that's a great question. And, I would be hopeful and optimistic that they're doing it because it's the right thing to do. But I also know that many of them have seen that there are clear business benefits to creating a diverse, equitable, and inclusive culture. We know that having diversity increases your ability to innovate, to problem solve, creativity. And so, we really see that when there are talent, especially when we are projecting talent shortages, bringing as many people to the table as possible to solve those talent shortages is really a clear business benefit. And making sure that we're not eliminating, many different groups of people from jobs when we can tap into them both across geographies with flexible and remote work, but also making sure that we're creating equitable access to new paths. So people are not self-selecting out, and that as organizations are creating needs for these programs, that they're not selecting people out either. So, a lot of the organizations that we see, they know that there's a clear benefit. And so the ones who are doing this successfully have clear commitment from the top down that this is important, and it's brought through all of their actions. There's metrics, there's a lot of objectives that they're trying to meet. And so that's really, really key. The other thing that I will say is that, we are in a shifting paradigm right now of what employers and what employees expect from organizations. And so diversity, equity, and inclusion is a must moving forward to attract, retain, and advance talent. People will not stay in organizations if they have options, if they're not feeling that they are belonging, contributing, and thriving. And so that's really key. We're moving into an economy post-pandemic where people will have more options. They will have more choices. Consumers have choices of brands to represent. And so those companies who are really doing this well are going to be having clear business benefits to that and reflecting social values, but also creating those cultures that can really be successful in a post-pandemic economy.
Thanks so much. And Lauren, Lark, sorry, we're going to give you the last word here. And you know, in thinking about the employers you're working with who are providing these apprenticeships and pre-apprenticeships and focusing on women and women of color, more specifically, taking those approaches of outreach that you've described that are so important, effective. What do you see that these leaders motivating them and engaging them to continue with this work?
I think what should motivate them is realizing how amazing women workers are. I can't tell you how many times that, you know, especially for carpenters, that I've heard from male carpenters, just how detail oriented women are. And that's a consistent uh, set of praise that women often get in that trade. Um, I think that what should motivate them is thinking about having the most competitive, talented, dynamic workforce possible. And you literally cannot do that without getting people who come from, you know, um, come from different backgrounds, have a different set of lens that they look at life through, that they look at their work through. So I think, again, diversity and inclusion is not a liability, it is an asset. And the investment that you put into diversity and inclusion, the payoffs are enormous. And um, I also kind of want to piggyback off of the question you directed to Chandra. What's needed is really federal investment in in infrastructure, but also definitely carving out a strong place for women within that. What's needed is not only the preservation, but the expansion of grants such as WANTU, which is Women in Non-Traditional Occupations. And I've personally, in my work here in Philadelphia, I've seen the fruits of that funding through our Women in Non-Traditional Careers initiative, which builds awareness around women's access to careers in construction, manufacturing, and the transit industries. So I think it's investment. I think it's accountability, right? So documenting women's entry and retention in these career pathways. And it's also, again, on a very kind of uh, grassroots level, right? Just making sure that women see themselves in these opportunities. So um, for that, you know, low wage female worker saying, okay, if you can do this low wage work that is taxing on your body, it is taxing on your mind, it requires you to work safely, it requires you to lift things, it requires you to problem solve and think critically. Why can't you be a sheet metal worker where you still have all those skill sets and all those things are required for you to be successful in that trade, and you earn a ton more money, right? And you have a career that you can be really proud of and pass down a legacy to your children if you have them. So I think it's really about making sure that women see themselves, making sure that women employers are implementing mentorship programs, making sure that employers are also uplifting their women in leadership, and putting, you know, women in positions where they can also recruit more women to these opportunities because they're in a position of leadership. And so that's those are my suggestions, not only federally what I think we should be doing in terms of investment, but also what employers can how employers should be thinking about this work.
Well, thank you so much for closing us out with that, Lark, and also for you, for Lauren and Chandra, for spending your time with us today to share your deep insight and expertise in this issue. And really encourage us all in the work we do to see the opportunities of the moment we are in now, of the opportunities to reckon with the inequalities of the past and to create solutions that are going to be equitable for women, Black women, Latina women, all women, and that will give to us an economy that can be truly strong, diverse, creative, and innovative for the future. So thank you all so much.
Thank you, Lois. Thanks,
Thank you.
Chandra. Thanks, Lauren.
Thank you.